Welcome back to the Daily Edge, Season 2. I'm here with my brothers TJ and Todd, and we're ready to get back after it. We are here today to talk about goals. I think we all come into January and we set, goals, New Year's resolutions. By the time this gets out, it'll be interesting to see how many of you are still hanging on, right? The statistics say 80% are gone by, January. So would love to talk to you guys, I think in a lot of different facets. One is the time you spend setting these goals. Like, how do you really dive into deciding what's most important? And then two, how do you sustain them? So either one of you want to jump in and get us started off?
I'll jump in. I mean, I've been big on goals. I think goals are super important. I was reading a book the other day called Indistractable. And what I loved about one thing he said in this book is said, you can't be distracted if you don't know what you're being distracted from. And that hit me so hard because if you don't know what you should be doing or could be doing or what's most important to you to be doing, then you're really not distracted, right? I think we all think of phones and scrolling, whatever is distracted. If you're planning to do that, it's technically not a distraction. We live in a world that obviously we're drowning in distraction. The noise is deafening. And so I think one of the biggest ways to combat that, one of the most underrated ways to combat that is to plan and know what you want to be doing or should be doing during those same times. And so I think the beginning part of the year, and I think a lot of times the 1-1 thing is overplayed. It might be 2-1, it might be 3-1. It's never too late to put a plan in place and know what you want to be doing and what the most important things are for you to be accomplishing in a given week, month, or year. And so I do love the process of goal planning because I think that's the foundation for knowing what you should be doing with your time. Yeah.
I think you're going to be the expert here because you've been doing this for over a decade and tiers of goals. You have your big goals and then you kind of work your way down, yearly, monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, in your case. But yeah, I think in this particular instance, I'm really going to be excited to glean some information from both of you because, in one facet of the 3 or 4 you mentioned earlier, faith, family, fitness, whatever, business being the 4th, not necessarily in that order. I've gotten one of those down, maybe 1.5 of those down. So taking some insight from you guys, I think there's a lot to what I've noticed recently. I think a lot of people have read the book Atomic Habits. I haven't taken a ton from that, but I know you probably have better memory of it than I do. But one of the big things is those baby steps. And I think too often, this is one of the biggest pitfalls, is too often we're putting these huge goals in front of ourselves that we're going to do X, Y, Z, and it's just, there's no path to get there. For me, financial planning is one of those things. Took some small steps this year, but not where I wanted to be at this point in time, a few weeks into the year. So kind of reconfiguring that. And again, would love insight from either of you. When you're not hitting a goal, how do you reconfigure? What are some of the things that you try to implement to get you there? I can speak to that on the fitness side of things, but as it relates to business or as it relates to, again, personal finance or whatever, what are some of the things that you guys put in play when things aren't working right off the get-go and you recognize I'm 3 weeks in and I haven't made any progress at all?
Yeah, I think consistency is important. Todd, you just said something that was interesting. It's we use 1-1 as this magical day, right? And then I think the problem with that is it feels like it's the only day you can reset, right? So if 1-1 becomes, I'm doing this year, and the minute you stop it, you're like, well, I can't start again until next year, right? So I can tell you in the business world where we spend, we get together, we do offsites, quarterly offsites. They say spend time working on the business, not in the business. It's consistency, it's routine and habit. As much as I don't love to say that, we are constantly reevaluating. And the truth is your goals might change and they might shift throughout the year, and that's okay too.
They should.
Yeah, you're gonna try things and be like, I thought this was the surefire, this was the holy grail, and we try something no, I don't think it is. So we create that consistency to have those meetings, and then accountability, from the IMG standpoint, when we're meeting, I don't want to show up in a room with my leadership team and have not delivered on the things that I said I would execute on. So the accountability for me is a huge one. Just like this last year with the races, that we had set some goals when we first started the podcast, and it's like I said I was going to do it. I'm going to do it, and therefore I got to go through the experience of it. And I didn't love all the training up to it, but I had some incredible experiences for it. So consistency, accountability, building the habits, and then giving yourself permission to start over, change, or shift.
The phrase that jumps out to me is what gets measured gets managed. I think the key to consistency is tracking and measuring. I think that's the lack thereof is the easiest way to fall off. And the existence of a good tracking system that's in front of you on a regular basis is the best way, because you're continuing to remind yourself, hey, I spent time deciding that this was really important to me this year. And to continue to remind yourself of that is critically important in the world today, because as I mentioned, we're drowning in distraction, the noise, the things that others will prioritize for us. This is another one of my favorite phrases, is if you don't prioritize your day, someone else will. And there's so many companies that have gotten so good about taking our attention and prioritizing our day for us, and it's quite a travesty. But I'll give you an example for us. And my 12-year-old is one of the most motivated of the three of my family, but he's still 12. And trying consistency is a tough thing for any kid at that age. When we set some goals, he and I did. I wanted to do a certain number of pull-ups a year. He wanted to do a certain number of push-ups last year. And so we had a calendar, a 365-day calendar that we taped to the wall right when you come in. And you guys have probably seen it when you come in. And it's right there when you come in the back door from the garage. And every single day you walk in, you see it. And if you're behind and your numbers aren't there, you're reminded, wait a second, this was an important thing. Why am I not there? And then you find a way to make the time to do it. Now, that's obviously a very substantial thing. Not everyone has to start there. I think you can start smaller. In some cases, it's doing a to-do list for the day. Hey, these are the most important things I want to get accomplished this day. And that obviously is not speaking to annual goals, but I say that in that you don't always have to have this big, huge, and goal program. Sometimes it can be simple, but that's an example where what gets measured gets managed. That's been that was hugely successful, and he hit his push-up goal last year.
How do you put yourself on the right path? Because what we've seen, I'll speak again in the fitness space, is it's very difficult to begin a journey if you don't see results quickly, right? And the good thing for something like a weight loss journey is normally that first week you do. Like you'll see a big jump, then you plateau, but maybe you can use that historic reference as something to keep you pushing forward. I think as you get older, priorities sometimes shift without you knowing, and it gets hard. We've talked about this, I think maybe in prior podcasts, we've talked about, generating self-worth from other things, especially as you mature and as your responsibilities become different. When we were in our 20s and 30s, I had kids a little later. So, you can focus on like raw work output, right? I'm putting 50 hours a week into work, or I'm putting, and you can focus this passion in different areas that are very measurable, that you can just lock in and go. And the more you accomplish, the more that reinforces that you're doing something. Then you get to a stage in life where you have kids that are specifically where the majority of ours are. You have one that can drive themselves, but then it changes. And so it's like, what are some of the best methods for stepping back? I will talk about this from a personal perspective. The kids and the sports. My day starts to decay depending about 2:30 p.m. That's really hard to come to grips with the fact that, like, man, I had X goal or Y goal or whatever, and I've got all these things to fit in, where in the past I could just do this activity for this period of time and I didn't have any worries about anything else. Well, now I don't feel like I am meeting my own standards because I'm spending 5 hours a day getting kids to and from sports, or 3 or whatever. I'm spending an hour and a half a day running. I'm spending 6 hours a day working and then this, that, and the other thing. So like, what are some of the mechanisms or some of the things you tell yourself to put yourself in a place where, you know, dividing your attention is okay, versus, you know, being frustrated with yourself for not hitting these really high marks that you've hit in the past because you just have more responsibility?
I think it's a planning problem. And what I mean by that is I think it's very easy for us to miss goals like that. I think it's very important for all of us and for all parents out there to support their kids in athletics and to be there to get them to and from, but also attend, watch, talk with them about it. And those are the kinds of goals that are hard to quantify. Like, how do you put that into a goal? I want to do X hours of shuttling for my kids, right? But at the end of the day, that is a very important priority. It's not something that you do and you're like, you regret doing it, right? It is actually an important thing, but I think the lack of satisfaction comes from the lack of realization and upfront planning that is actually an important priority and something where you want to be investing your time. So that, I think, is, for me, one of the most important things. And as I've gone through goal setting phases, I've had more of an appreciation for that. One of the things that comes to mind is I know I've mentioned a few times here is the quarterly trips with the boys. Is like, there's no way to really quantify that other than a pass fail, right? Supporting them or spending time with them in that capacity. But I put it on my goals because I want to recognize that that's not a waste of time. That shouldn't be something that's competing for other, you know, more quantifiable goals. I think we just got to recognize that.
This is interesting because I think when I think goals, and I think a lot of people, it's generally self-improvement goals, or it's kind of focused on self. You're talking about a goal of, my goal is to make sure I'm at 80% of my kids' games, or that I'm having these, which I think is interesting because I would be curious how many people actually would identify those as goals and track those. I mean, people like, yeah, I want to go to all my kids' games, but like, do you really sit back and say, okay, well, I'm going to be intentional about this, the conversations I'm having before and after? That doesn't seem so intuitive to me. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Well, no, I think it's really intriguing, and I think this is a big thing, and I want to bring that back to like your guys' perspective as executives as well. Everything has evolved tremendously over the last 50 years in terms of, like, let's look at work in general. I think a lot of it is there's conscience. Your conscience is there saying like this. Let me step back. I guess I saw a quote just a few minutes ago. Was it Catherine O'Hara? The one of these actresses just died, and somebody had caught her in an airport recently.
The lady from Home Alone.
Yeah. Recently just died. Somebody caught her in an airport, and they're like, you've been in all these iconic roles. Which role do you want to be remembered for the most? And her comment was, the mother of my kids. Right? And so, like, then you go back and you think about, all right, I mean, really, 50%, if not more, of our goals as humans is to raise this next group of humans to accomplish more and drive society forward, as well as, you know, improving ourselves, setting a good example, whatever. But a lot of it funnels down to that. And I think that historically, the way that the economy was set up, you know, there were much more defined roles. There's many fewer efficiencies. So all of your goals traditionally were centered around self, or were centered around business output. And so then we collectively developed this consciousness that if I'm not excelling in these particular arenas, then I'm failing. Mm-hmm. And as all of these things have evolved and sports have gone from one rec practice a week and one game a week to, you know, 3 or 4 or 5 plus all of these games, optimizations and enhancements and improvements have actually given us the opportunity. You couldn't work from home if you worked at a factory. You couldn't work from home. Our dad was in distribution. He couldn't work from home. They didn't work from home. There wasn't the technology available to do that until the 90s. And even then, not so much, because you still didn't have video conferencing and things like that. So the opportunity to be present in your kids' lives wasn't as prevalent. So now, I guess I say all that to ask you guys as business executives, and you can take this another way if you want. Does that change your perspective if you had a person working for you that was getting their job done, but you found out that 40% of their day was kids' activities, like you said, going and watching them, and then being able to talk with them after practice about the good and the bad and help them work through these things and improve them as a human? If you're finding out, well, my worker's getting things done, but there's more of it, more time allocated to being a good parent and raising this next generation, is that something you're cool with? Because I think, again, just to restate, we have this internal conscience that if we're not focused on these one or two things, that we are failing, and we shouldn't have goals in those other areas.
That's a big question on the business side. Before I answer that question, I just want to say one thing about goals. I think what you hinted at, Trent, is I think a little bit the challenge with goals. Goals, really the primary reason that we have goals, or in my opinion, we should have goals, is just to help us prioritize how we spend our time. Mm-hmm. We want to spend our time on the things that are most important to us, and that's why you go through that prioritization process. And so goals, I think, have been they've been, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, bastardized maybe, and they've kind of become a self-obsessive like achievement, and I think they're really just a prioritization mechanism. So that when we look back, you hear about the people that look back and they say, well, you never wish you would have worked more, right? At 80 or 85, you look back and you want to say, I spent my time exactly how I would have wanted to spend my time. This much with my kids, this much trying to create professional outcomes, that sort of thing. That's where I think goals really become a great tool when they're looked at in the right way. To answer your question about work, if someone is miraculously talented and is getting their job done in a half a day and they're deploying the other half of their workday for personal gain, I think it depends on whether or not I'm compensating them for the job that they're completing, or if I'm compensating for the level of their talent, if that makes sense at all. Meaning, if someone is compensated more for the level of talent and they're a extremely high quality person who is very capable of delivering high level, high strategic things, then I think I'm going to be more inclined to want to get the bulk of a workday out of them, whatever they can accomplish in that workday. Now, if it's someone that I'm paying to manage or we're paying to manage a certain size book of business, and this is the role, and they're able to do that and, keep customers happy and all that in this amount of time, then I'm probably more flexible with that sort of thing.
I think the key component to that, the second part of that is, having the metrics to support that story. When COVID happened, we were probably more of call it a traditional old school business, which is like clock in, you clock out. And I think that is, we used to joke because, Dad and their company was like, you're there at 8 o'clock, you're there till 5 o'clock, and it doesn't matter if you're playing Candy Crush for 2 hours at lunch, right? But you're there, physically there. And when COVID happened, we had to kind of rethink that and become more outcome-based. So to Todd's point, it's like, what percentage of phone calls are you answering from home? And how many rings? Client closed referral loops where we're actually getting feedback from the client. What is your NPS score? There's things that you have to measure to actually be able to validate the outcome that you're trying to achieve. So It is complex. I think we try to offer as much flexibility within all the companies to support in realizing that business may not be their main focus and the thing that they prioritize.
And different roles have different challenges. I mean, if you're in a customer service role, it's tough for somebody to not be at their desk answering the phone when a customer's calling in. If you're in accounting, maybe there's a little more flexibility for you to do things later at night after the kids go to bed.
It's interesting. It's like, let's just say, as an organization, if you've developed a scenario where you're delivering the best customer service possible, right? You've created excellence, and you have this staff, right? These partners, these employees, these human resources that are able to do that. And then as we advance technologically, that gets easier to do. And let's say that everything is still on the up and up. It's interesting to think about. I'll think about it from my perspective. We make cables for people to charge their phones, and our value proposition is that we allow you to express yourself through your mobile power, right? So you can get something that helps you express your personality. Is humanity going to die off if we go out of business tomorrow? No. However, if the employees at our office stop raising their kids because, like, let's say, for instance, they're like, look, it's 9 to 5. And I'm just using, these are hypothetical examples. It's not real life, but hey, we need you in California every week. So you need to fly out here. And we know people. We have a good friend. I think Pete Wallace's sister. We used to fly a lot together when I was traveling a ton. Flew to New York every week for work and stayed there all week and came home. So, like, it's really interesting to see how things are evolving. And it's like, should that be, like, again, if we went out of business tomorrow, that's not going to change anything. But if I stop raising my kids and stop being there for my kids, what happens to the next generation? And again, you can look historically and say, hey, there were generations where the kids basically raised themselves and they were fine, right? But it's just really interesting to evaluate the situation.
Those were probably few and far between because there wasn't as many dual working families back in the day, right? So there was always an adult, for the most part, in normal traditional family settings were probably raising the kids, and now that's not necessarily the case, right? You have dual working families. It's a really interesting concept and thing to think about because
it's just unique. I mean, I know this has gone off on a tangent, but like setting goals in those spaces that aren't necessarily traditional spaces to set goals is just something that I've never even explored really, because it's always been kind of a secondary thing that you just do. You may set goals. Actually, you just said you did. You set goals as it relates to like your quarterly trips with your sons and things like that. But setting goals on some of those things that may be more under the radar that society doesn't look upon with favor like they do other things, which is kind of interesting, right? I think you ask any adult, any parent what their biggest accomplishment would be, and it would be their kids. But like very few people are looking, and I guess maybe you get these compliments later in life. There's not a lot of reinforcement for, there's not a lot of, I guess, tools to measure how great of a parent you are in the moment. It's
10, 20 years down the road. I think one of the struggles that I have the most difficult time with is just staying interested in the goal long term. And I find that even more so when it's, I am more accountable to others than myself. So if I've got a self goal that I've set that's important, and then maybe a month later I'm like, it's not that important. And that's just an interesting thing that I've noticed over the years, that I'll set goals, and when I commit to other people or other things, I value those as more important, or I respond better to those, because I guess you could even say that it's more upsetting to me to lose face than it is to fall through with my own.
Why do you think that is? Do you think it's because you didn't spend enough time up front actually truly assessing whether or not that was important, and that's why a month later it wasn't as important? Or what do you feel like in those cases is the primary driver of it being really important today and not a month from now?
Yeah, I tend to jump around quite a bit. It could be some of that. It could be the lack of clarity. But I've always jumped around quite a bit, and I'm always, the new next thing gets me excited, the new idea to chase and build, and the new idea to chase and build. And I think it's a cop-out to say that's the way I'm wired. I think that would be but in some instances, I get disinterested. Something changes, and I get interested in something else, and I want to go do something else.
I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a cop-out. I mean, from my perspective, it's like I'm wired very similarly in terms of if there's not other human accountability, I just don't care. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious in terms of, like you and I talked the other day about the races, right? And I've been pretty forthcoming about the races. Like, my goal with the races is to create a new platform for somebody to accomplish something that they didn't believe. And I believe there's a cascading effect. If this person comes and accomplishes something they didn't believe they could do, then that inspires their community or their children or gives somebody a good example. I'm so bad to the point that you guys have both, you've come up and said, hey, let me help you with this because there's, you guys have put a lot of time and effort into something and there's no reason for it to be where it's at. But I think I'm that way with everything.
Here's what happens, and this pattern has played out in my life. You start doing something because you're passionate about it. You're changing lives through your races. At some point in time in your life, it's going to be just another number, another racer, and you're going to impact hundreds and then thousands, and then it's just going to be the majority of your time is going to be doing billing and registrations. And I feel like
I hate that. Yeah.
Yeah, but you get desensitized to, at least my experience is, what starts as a super passion project and builds over time becomes desensitized, and the true mission and the true impact starts to fade. And that's when I start to lose interest. And I have a really hard time pulling myself back into that, to that part, to really tie the meaning back into it, because you end up doing these things up here and they're way far away from the things down here. And that person that just accomplished and changed their life and committed to this race and lost 30 pounds and is healthier and all those things that you used to be like blown away by, you don't even see anymore.
What I want to ask you both, if we play with this hypothesis for a second that goals are really a tool to help you prioritize your time. I think one of the things that, even though you guys aren't goal people, my gut tells me if you were to look back over the last few years, you would still be very pleased with maybe how your time has been allocated, or maybe not. I'd be curious to know how you guys feel about that. Do you feel like you have found a way to allocate your time properly over the past few years? And if not, where have been the biggest gaps or things when you look back that you're like, man, I wish I would have?
I think it's been pretty good over the last couple of years. There's always shortcomings, but it's the big thing over the last 2 years has been realization that my value is in different capacities than it has been in the past, and being comfortable with that. Realizing that, I need to operate in an optimal manner now that we are juggling, and we all juggle a ton of things. And most of society does, or maybe a portion of it does. But I think, it's been recognizing like, look, you don't have to sit here and knock out a spreadsheet that's going to take you personally 4 hours to do to feel like you're important and that you got something accomplished when you have LLMs or other AI tools at your fingertips that can do it for you in 10 minutes. Just because you were efficient with your time doesn't make you less of a person. Realizing what high level impacts you can make with ideas and laying framework and foundation and the relationships that you have, what kind of an impact you can make with those things versus like this raw horsepower, crazy output. So I think for me, it's been pretty good. Also recognizing where and what needs to be in place for those things to happen. Right? So it's like not taking on anything that's too monumental in one of those particular silos so that it borrows from something else. Right? I'm not doing, Corey's a good example. He does these double threshold work. I can't do that. I can't do it, not just because my body can't handle it, but I can't do it from a scheduling perspective. Because if I'm doing it, then I'm missing getting the kids up and getting them to school. And on the back end, I'm missing the sports side of things. I can't do it. And then I'm taking too much time out of my workday. So I can't put that time and effort into fitness, but I can do these things to make my fitness goals sustainable long-term. So that's I feel pretty good about it. And even though I'm not super formal with goals, I think that there are some guidelines or guardrails in place to push me down the right paths.
Yeah, I had a couple of goals last year, especially on the fitness side, which pushed me into, training and staying in shape and accomplishing some things that I felt overall pretty good about. I have a tendency to, when I reflect in a moment, to say I never did enough, or I never had the best plan, or I never. But yet, my daughter's birthday was a couple days ago, and I spent time going through her pictures, and I was reminded of everything that happened. Like, when I look at it in a moment time, be like, man, did I really, like, no, I never really do a really good job. But then I think about all the things that we did this summer and the intentionality. And when I'm going back and reminded of the memories, I think I do better than I give myself credit for, but I have a tendency to kind of get pretty down on myself from a timing standpoint. But I've done some things where I try to spend a day a week with Isaiah. He's homeschooled, which has been a lot of fun for us. And then, sometimes we'll call them the guilty pleasures when I want to play Blatro or get on Whatnot or any of those things. Like that's me being a kid. And where I could always look at those and say, like, oh man, anytime I'm on that, I'm completely like, sometimes that's okay. Like, it's okay to have that time and to kind of section that off. And when I feel like it's getting out of control, which it does, I said, look, I'm not going to play it this week. And I told my youngest son, I was like, dude, we're not playing this week. And I showed him my screen time every night when I got home. I didn't play it. Like, so there's times when I know it gets out. And so the whole balance thing, but I go to all my kids' games. I'm as present. I'm home for dinner, every single night that I'm not out of town. And as if you asked me, I would say I could do better. I don't know if my hope is, especially with my kids, that they look back and they see a dad that was present and engaged. From a business perspective, that I'm very similar, that I'm engaged, that I'm leading, that I'm passionate, and that I'm providing the support and the direction to help us get to the next level. So I do believe it goes in waves, and I do believe we have seasons of calmness and patience, and then we have seasons, I like to call it the Moses season, where you're out taking risks and you're living on the edge and you're doing things. And I find myself coming in and out of those cycles quite often.
Yeah, I would just say a couple of things on that. Both of your responses there. I think there's a element of encouragement in there that you don't have to have a monstrous goal plan to be able to prioritize your time appropriately, when, again, ultimately that's the goal. Because in addition to that, you guys, again, TJ, you hardly set any goals, but from a fitness perspective, you've achieved what you've wanted to achieve. You've hit those things. You found a way to prioritize. You have a few main focuses each day, and you can hone in on those. And so I think there are different ways to skin the cat. The other thing that I think I would add is, I think the conversation we just had is important. Going back and saying, is there anything I'm missing? As I look back, as part of my planning each year, I'm looking back at the prior year and thinking, okay, yeah, I really missed the mark on this one. Spiritual is really important to me, and I didn't do any of these things, and I feel like that left me really exposed, more stressed out, more anxious than I've been in previous years or needed to be. So I really need that to be a part. I think looking back and having that retrospective is just very, very important to understanding what you may want to prioritize more going forward.
How important is environment in hitting some of those goals?
Oh, I think it's extremely important. I mean, again, I can go on the fitness tangent forever. And understanding your own personality and what drives you. And we've talked about how things, morph over the years or shed their old skin. And, I think that it's important to pay attention to that. I see a lot of different people that utilize different things to drive them forward. You mentioned your, accountability is big for you. Having somebody else is accounting on you to be there. I think if that's something that drives you, that's a big thing to harness then and utilize that to find a group of people that are going to do the same thing. After doing that and it goes in waves, right? For me personally, at the beginning of the journey, it was solo, and then it was a lot about accountability. And now it's something where, because of the other schedules, right, and everything else that's around, it can't be that, right? I can't add 30 minutes of driving to a run because I just don't have the time to do that. And I'm taking away from something else that needs to focus. So I need to be on the treadmill. And I really think it's unfortunate that you see society at large ridiculing people or uplifting particular behaviors versus others, because it's whatever is in vogue at the moment. You see if you take the last half decade of the David Goggins approach to things, right, and you're seeing people highlighting that they're outdoors running when it's -5 and they have no shirt on, and I mean, I could be vulgar, but you're just not a man. You're not the one if you're not out doing that, right? You're not tough if you're not out hitting, runs at -5 at 4:30 in the morning, whatever. And I think that's terrible, because there are people that either have, from a timing perspective, not enough time, or not the time to do that in the morning. Maybe they work something that doesn't allow that, or maybe it's something like, they can't be sustained. Maybe they're at a point in their journey where they can't sustain effort if it means freezing ass cold and dark every morning. Maybe, it's more sustainable for them if they're on a treadmill, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think, unfortunately, right now in the fitness space, you have too many people telling you that there's a particular way to the promised land, and there's not, and it's going to change for you.
There's no promised land.
No, there's not. There's not
in anything.
But I think the promised land is consistency, right? Is the promised land is, okay, I have a diet that's not a diet anymore; it's a way of life, and I eat a particular way.
I'm still looking for that one.
Well, yeah, but I mean that's what works for me. Or I found a fitness routine that I can do until I'm 90, or at least some component of it. That's what works for me. That's what you're right. There's always hard things. But you just need to be honest with yourself. You need to recognize what works for you in that particular season you're in, and you embrace that and go for it. And you're going to get people that ridicule you, and it's unfortunate, but it is what it is.
Well, I think what you're saying, Todd, is like a goal is a way to prioritize your time, because there's no ending. There's no promised land. There's no sub 130, half, sub 3 hour full. Like, there's no number that shows everyone that you've arrived, that gives you this ultimate, okay, I weigh 150 now. Now it's okay. I can weigh 200 next year, right? Like, there's no ending in anything. And it's the constant progression of feeling like, I think as men, we want to feel like we've accomplished things. There's an accomplishment of, I've done something that's helping myself or others, and we use these goals and other things to help us feel accomplished.
Yeah, I think that's 100% correct. Now, I will say, I think there is certainly a benefit to having some quantified goals in there, because you're not only prioritizing your time in some sense, but you're prioritizing the level of effort or intensity you put into those activities. Mm-hmm. And what I'll say is, last year I tried this, and it didn't work out as well as I had thought it might, which was 5 hours. I changed my goal from miles to time. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to work out 5 hours a week, whatever I was doing. It was Orange Theory was an hour, or running, or whatever. And that didn't go very well for me. Now, I missed the goal. I had some injury issues I missed, but it was not a very motivating, and I found myself kind of doing a lot of easier workouts, and I didn't get the mental benefit that I get from some harder workouts and from some of the progress and achievement from a pace perspective. So I think it's interesting so all that to just kind of also say, I think there is value if you're setting goals, if someone's setting goals that, really wanting to specifically achieve, and I'll speak to one that I've set this year, is to break 3 at Boston, which is going to be a super tall order, but it has really helped guide the intensity of the workouts that I'm doing. I'm doing these threshold workouts. I'm measuring it. I know what intensity I need to bring to these workouts in order to achieve that. And that's helpful. And I think it provides some positive reinforcement. You're accomplishing certain things, and it helps with the momentum. I think more than anything, it's that momentum.
I would agree 100%. But the point I was trying to make is, like, you break 3 hours in Boston doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't. I mean, it matters to you. It's important in the moment, but it's like, breaking 3 hours was the most important. You spent 10 years chasing that, 7 years chasing that goal, and then you broke 250, and you were way more excited, way more energy in breaking the 3 hour than the 250. And you don't even talk about it because it's not a big deal anymore. And, so it's like, there's this, like, I agree 1,000%. You're going to achieve more by setting goals. And the environment question was like, spiritually, I struggle to spend time in the Word. And I got with a couple of guys and we started memorizing scripture, and we're like 15 weeks in. And I found that, like, I go to bed reciting it. I mean, we're 30 verses in, like, in memorization. And it is like, it takes 10 minutes to go through, but it's has me in the Word at night, has me in the Word when I wake up. I'm thinking about it. I find numerous times that it's applicable throughout the day. And it's just because we decided to do this. We get together only once a month, so it's not a huge time thing, but we're when we get together, we recite this, right? And so it's like having the environment help build the habit, which helps me be better in my life and be able to apply things from scripture to my life and others. And so, like, it all stemmed for me in that instance from being around the right people, from a habit.
And that can build momentum. I think we should not overlook some of the fringe or unintended benefits of some of this stuff, right? So, like, that is probably psychologically your ability to do that, and the progress that is probably finding its way into other areas of your life, and it's providing momentum. I mean, I know that with some of these workouts, to your point, the 3 hour marathon goal there's no value to that. There's no tangible value, but through this process of trying to achieve that, the quality of my days so far this year since I've been training have been night and day to the several months leading up where I wasn't able to train. The lower stress, the lower anxiety, the momentum of being able to do difficult things and get through those workouts relatively sets a much lower bar for the difficulty of other things that are going on. I think those are important elements to recognize as well.
Yeah, I've just been thinking the entire time you guys have been talking. I mean, it's really intriguing. And I like some of the stuff we've talked about around, like, I'm going to call it just setting goals in the negative space, meaning, like, the positive space being goals for fitness, negative space being goals for rest, positive space being goals for business, negative space being goals for family. Just the alternate, right? The areas we don't typically set goals in. I wonder, does it ever get to a point, probably this question is more for you, Todd, where it's like, okay, I wake up and I look at my goals, or I know roughly what my goals are for this week or this month, and it gets overwhelming. It's like I have sleep goals and fitness goals and kids goals and business goals and other business goals and third business goals. Like, is there ever get to that point where it's like, oh, and you need what Trent talked about earlier with, okay, I have an hour of this time for Bellotto or whatever it is. Does it ever get to that point?
For sure. Especially when you're not hitting the goals. That's when the momentum fades and it gets very, very difficult to continue to plow ahead. Now, I will say, when you are firing, it actually builds on itself and it's more motivating and more exciting. When you are every day crossing off the lists of the things that you know are most important to you and you're putting your time exactly where you want it, the psychological momentum that builds is insane. Like, you just continue to, like, want more and to do more and plan more because you know you're using your time as optimally as you possibly can. So it can go both ways, for sure, depending on.
Do you feel like you need to evolve your goal setting in areas where you're more mature in your accomplishments? Like, I say that, we've talked about the sub 3 goal. Sometimes I'll sit there and knock out a workout and be like, I think we talked about it the other day where I'm like, I don't know. Like, the numbers don't really matter. Like, I'm not out here to prove anything. I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I think
it's a great question for you
to keep self-confidence up there.
Because you don't race much anymore.
No,
Is it because you've accomplished everything that and you kind of just like, what does it take for you to get the edge back?
Well, and that's kind of this interesting conundrum. Keegan did his thesis or partial thesis, and I hope I don't butcher this, Keegan, so I'm sorry if I do, on the motivating factors for long-term endurance athletes. What keeps them coming back? And the 3 things are competency, perceived competency and environment. How good you are, how good you think you are, and the environment that surrounds you. If you look at that, seems insightful but obvious. I never had thought about it through that lens, but thinking about it through that lens now, that's why you see in the pro athlete ranks, a lot of them go back and train with their college coaches. 2 best marathoners in the United States right now both train with their college coach. Same with some of the best female runners in the country, because that's a familiar environment for them. It's somewhere where there's, a lot of, there's reduction in stress and things like that. But for me, that was kind of the premise to my question. For him was like, it does get, like you said, I've broken 250. I've won the last 2 races that I've run. Now I'm cherry picking a little bit. Like I'm not going to go run Monumental and expect to win it, but it's like it does get more difficult for me to kind of figure out who, what, when, why, and where, and a lot of times it is like.
I can relate.
That's the beauty in the planning process, though, because you get an opportunity to find your why, right? You get an opportunity because I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek. We've talked about the start with why several times on here before, but I think that's the beauty of that, is what is important to me and why. And when you really spend time there, like I would say this might be subconscious, but a lot of what you do is to continue to do hard things to set an example for your kids, either in similar sports or in others.
That's true.
Right? And so there's a why there, and I think spending time in that place and understanding what and why is important is a huge part of it, of the value proposition.
I think there's 3 layers. Yeah, you're right. It is. Now, if I were to think about it, that is one of them. One of the other ones would be, I want to have context for what other people are going through so I can empathize with them in particular situations, because I think without being able to do that, I've looked at people in the past and had a negative emotion towards them. Like I see somebody go do something and I'm like, that is the dumbest thing wait, let me empathize with that. Oh, maybe I've been there because I've gone through that in some capacity. So I think that's another thing. But if I look at goals today, I'm sure there's something egotistical about it. Like I'm sure there's a self reason there for sure. I like looking, like with the lactate thing, I like looking and seeing, I am progressing. That's
it's human nature.
But at the same time, it's tough.
What I think happens to a lot of people, and I don't think this is just endurance athletes, I think it's in everything. You compete until you reach a level of success, and then you coast. And the ones that are wildly successful are the ones that never coast. And if you go back to the biblical parallel of like an Abraham versus a Moses, like I arguably have nothing else to accomplish in the business world. Mm-hmm. I don't have to. You don't have to run another race.
Sure.
I don't have to do anything different. However, I think when you look back on life, you'll regret that pause. And it's something that as you wrestle with in athletics, I wrestle with in business. Is like, I'm coming out of a season of Abraham and I'm going into a season of Moses where I've been challenged to get excited and to reinforce the why and reattach the why, which is hard to keep front and center. It's hard to keep front and center. And when you've achieved so much, arguably to anyone else and to yourself, it's an easier way to be passive. It's easier, arguably, to to be the director of a race than run it and go through the training of it. Maybe not prairie. That's an animal in itself, staying up for 3 days. But I'm actually in the middle of this transition right now, and I'm excited about going into the season of Moses, but it's one of more risk. It's one with highs and lows, where the other one is just kind of like it's even keel. And I think going back to why, keeping that at the forefront and the center over time is really hard to do.
Is it okay to shift though? Meaning that like you said, you look at some of the extraordinarily successful people. And unfortunately for us, the top of the food chain, we don't have a lot of, you don't know how much honest insight you have into the rest of their life. Whether it's reading an autobiography on Elon or on Jordan or on whoever, you don't know what the rest of their life was like. And you see some of these, and you don't know what to attribute to them and what not to. I think of, was it Marcus or James, one of Jordan's sons, like recently in the last year and a half, getting arrested for DWI and like giving him the "do you know who I am?" and like and again, he's an adult, right? Whatever, but is some of that perceived? Is some of that situation attributed to my dad never paused ever until he retired, and so he missed out on some of my stuff as a kid, and therefore I developed these defense mechanisms. One of them being egotism. So it's like, okay, I'm not going to continue to push so hard in this one particular area, but I'm going to shift and push hard. So I look back and say, man, yeah, I didn't make $100 million in business, but I raised these kids, or
But you never hear about that, right? Because the most successful people, most of them, their personal lives are train wrecks. They've been divorced,
right?
They have issues. And if someone has a really good balance, they're probably not wildly successful in anything, and they're not in the media. One of the guys that I admire in basketball that I think is pretty incredible, and LeBron James is still married. He has raised kids. He seems like a very wholesome. I don't think he's the best basketball player. I think Jordan was better, for the record, from a go on the court standpoint, but arguably a better person, and arguably, to still be faithful and and I'm not saying he's been faithful every minute of every day, but like he's still in a relationship. He seems to have his priorities. And I don't think those get recognized. Those have to be internalized, and you've got to believe that, because you're not getting rewarded for that externally.
Well, was he in a situation, and that's interesting you bring that up, because you've had this philosophy for a long time. You get to the top 10%, and then that's kind of, you're like, okay, next, top 10% next. And I wonder, with like LeBron, is that a situation where, from an effort perspective, that's what he put forward because he's so athletically gifted, potentially the most athletically gifted person that's ever existed? There are people like Bo Jackson and Jim Thorpe and guys you hear about historically, but like in modern society, LeBron James could have effectively done anything he wanted to do. You don't find people that are 6'9", 240 with all of that explosiveness. And so is it a situation where for Jordan, because he was, 6'6", and he had athletic gifts like no other from a explosiveness perspective, but he wasn't LeBron. LeBron is this freak. Is it because LeBron maybe, and you've seen this, right? Because I guess Jordan did it a little bit more on the extreme side but LeBron, you see him, especially these last 5 or 6 years, even though he does spend a lot of time and money on his body, you see him relaxing a lot more. Mm-hmm. Taco Tuesdays and drinking lots of wine and doing the podcast so I wonder if he had gotten to that 10% thing and has been able to coast just because he's so athletically gifted. I don't know.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think what I would say to all of that, I think, certainly balance is good. I think for everybody, it's just making that decision. Like Jordan, it may have been a conscious decision. Like, hey, you can't argue with the fact that the dude inspired millions and millions of people, and maybe he was willing to sacrifice the fine details of his kids and how they turned out because that's what he wanted to do. I know we've talked at times about Michael Jackson and Tiger Woods and how their dads approached. Psychologically, I think it's kind of come out over time that both Michael Jackson and Tiger Woods were pretty dysfunctional based on the pressure that was put on them at a young age to excel in their craft. And that was their, I would assume an intentional move by their fathers, and they decided that's what they wanted to do. And again, for anyone else, and Tiger is in a similar fashion, we saw what happened to him personally. Maybe that was intentional. My point is, I think that's, at the end of the day, I'm not here to judge somebody if they want to go all in on one thing or they want to have balance. I think at the end of the day, what we all want is to have lived a life that's in alignment with what we intended to live. And so if it happens to be throwing it all on this particular sport or skill or whatever, or it's maintaining a perfect balance across the 6 most important aspects of your life. I think that's what goals can help with.
Do you think people have the freedom to think about that because we're so heavily influenced and people are always telling us what we should think is most important?
Well, that's where I think the planning process comes in. It's just taking that time. And I think we can all find the time with all of the distractions and noise that we all do so much that has so little return on our time. But if we're taking the time to think, whether that's once a year, once a month, but half a day, few hours, few different, like the more time that I think we can just think about what is most important to us and develop that, I think, we're all very, very capable of that. And there's plenty of time to do that in today's society.
I think yes, but I think that comes with something that's becoming more and more rare, and that's emotional maturity and self-control. I think that there was a statistic we've gone over in prior podcasts about like the biggest predictor of success in a lot of situations is your ability is essentially self-control and how you can approach situations with that in mind. And I think what's happening now is that people are being captured in a lot of instances. I think there's 2 reasons you don't have the time to think, right? And you always talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that's one. I'm listening to a book right now called Jungle Keepers, and it's absolutely phenomenal. But
what's it called?
Jungle Keepers. And it's Paul Rosselli. But
what's the premise?
The premise is essentially this guy is dedicated. He traditional, struggled in school, and found that like nature was his thing, and has dedicated his life since he was 17 years old to the Amazon rainforest. And so he's been down there for over 20 years. And we're not talking like from a scientist perspective where he's like measuring, and we're talking like barefoot swimming in the Amazon, like living is remote. Like the guy that he developed his initial relationship down there, who he started working with, grew up in like those tribes that are right on like the edge of, like the guy didn't have shoes till he was 13. So like he learned the Amazon through that. But so a lot of the people down there, they don't have right. But in the same breath, I think that everybody can look and say, this is the way that I can best impact the world based on the way I was raised or the skill set I was given. Yeah. And this is where my focus should be. And Tiger probably gets to the age of 13, 14. He's like, well, I'm the best golfer in the world. I might as well lean into this because I have the opportunity to inspire millions and millions of people, versus somebody who grew up in the Amazon without shoes and without any modern amenities. Hey, the way I can impact people the most is maybe I can start a touring thing down here, or maybe I can partner with somebody who does have access to technology so we can expose people to what's happening in the Amazon and how they can contribute and help keep it alive and well, for the next X number of thousands of years.
It's fascinating because I would arguably say the guy down in the Amazon would have the ability to figure out his why and impact more than the person in the States. And I don't think it's a time thing as much as it is an influence thing. So I go by, let's say, take a data set myself, and I'm like, okay, what's important? Well, I want my kids to grow up well. Okay, well, what are the experiences they need? Well, then you go back to sports. Well, sports are important. Well, why aren't sports important? Because everyone says they're, and there's so many things that tell us that this is the norm, and these are the things that are important. And I'm not sure I can pull myself away to get to the true meat of it all. And someone that doesn't have all these things that the society or the environment we've created says are important,
I think you'd surprise yourself.
Maybe. We're going to find out this year.
Yourself.
Got a 2-day silent retreat on the books. But it's to me, it's fascinating because I think we are heavily influenced and our goals are heavily influenced, even if we spent time coming up with them, on our environment and what the people around us feels most important, or what our social media is telling us most important. And we set these things that aren't true center north of maybe who God's called us to be.
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I think you're right in a sense, but I think you just really have to step back and again, when it comes to that self-control and that perspective, sports, great example, right? I thought about that at that high level as well, like why? But then you think about, okay, wait, what are the important aspects of a human when they are thrust into the world? It's like, okay, community. All right, well, I'm putting them in a community. Do the same thing at school, right? But now I'm putting them in a community that has a goal. How do we work together to achieve a goal? Like that's something that you can test in sports. Failure. There are certain aspects, like if the guy in the Amazon, they were talking about these guys can fillet piranhas at 3 years old. Like you make a mistake down there, you're dead. You can test the waters and try scary things in that sports environment. So I think like it does take some extra time to step back and say, okay, what are the underpinnings of sports? Why is this important? What about it isn't important? We were at a track the other day. I had snowblowed a track. I was telling him for off-season track practice, and
sounds like you.
The kids are out there, and it's.
They shouldn't set it on fire.
The kids are out there, and it's 10 degrees out, right, or whatever it is, 12. And the coach walks out, who's been kind enough to let us use the track. And normally you'd look at that objectively from the outside or subjectively from the outside and be like, these parents are psychos. Why do they have these kids out here and it's 12 degrees? The coach walks out and he's like, man, this is so cool to see. And he's like, it's also cool to see you parents standing over here like completely detached from this, not caring about anything, as it relates to, because we're not there to analyze the kids' strides during warm-ups. Like a lot of people are. Those are the unimportant things. Like I'm focused on this at 11, their technical aspects. Or I'm forcing, like we don't force any of those kids to be out there. It's optional. And 9 or 10 of them show up every time because of the community aspect and tackling something together and the feeling they get from doing that. So being able to detach those elements from the hierarchy, I think where we struggle is when you haven't developed that emotional control, which I really think comes probably in your mid to late 30s, just through exposure to things. I mean, you look at how much all three of us, especially us two, used to argue, whether it was sports or politics online, and then realize that that's kind of futile. I think there are some people, if they step back, and I'm not saying that any of this is wrong, and maybe we'll talk about this in a future episode, but is protesting something somewhere an avenue of your life where you're going to make the most impact? Maybe it is. Maybe these people need a voice, and maybe it's the most impactful for you to be there. But I would challenge you to analyze that, step back and say, hey, look, maybe this isn't where my time is best used. Maybe it's best used, especially if I'm a parent, on my immediate family and I can help raise them. I can set goals to help raise them and spend time with them to get them to a point where maybe they can exact change. But sorry for the long rant.
I think it's good. I mean, I think you just uncovered within a particular category, parenting, what elements you found most important to instill in your kids: an ability to deal with failure, confidence, whatever those characteristics are. And then you can center your time around that. So I'm just going to quickly cover these. I'm interested into your guys' reaction more than anything. These are the 7 categories that I've landed on and my goals over like the decade of refining them.
Write these down, folks. These are probably pretty good.
They may not be for anyone else. I would be interested what you guys would add or remove from this list for yourselves. Spiritual. That is important. I was going to mention it a little bit earlier, but I think some of the most motivated people are the most spiritual people. They put forth, or just on the heels of Fernando Mendoza winning the Heisman, winning the national championship, very devout in his faith. And I think a lot of times spiritual, when you're putting effort forth in a gift, or you talked about a skill or a talent to honor God that he gave you with that, like there's no bottom to that well, right? You just keep going and going and going. When it's ego driven, that's when you have these cliffs of motivation versus like, I'm going to do everything I can with this gift. So anyways, spiritual. And we can get into the actual goals within these categories, but I think it's less important right now. Fitness and longevity. I want to be able to, as long as no disease or other thing that I might come up with might limit my lifespan, I want it to be as healthy and as long as possible. Mental wellness and balance. Like, I think there's an element, this is 3 of 7, just feeling good and operating from a good place day in and day out. That I'm 4 is just personal growth, continuing to learn, develop, take in more information, develop certain skills that are going to help me. 5 is parenting, 6 is giving back, and 7 is professional. Just professional types of things that I want to contribute, accomplish towards in professional endeavors. So spiritual, fitness, you talk about faith, fitness, and fatherhood. Those are 3 of them. That's probably an easy way to remember those 3. And then there's like a mental wellness, a personal growth, giving, and professional. What aspects of your guys' life would you say what would you drop? Which of those are not as important to you, and what might you add in its place?
I mean, I wouldn't argue any of those. I think those are all.
And I'm not saying argue, like, I'm just wondering how much of this is fit. This list has worked for me, but I don't know that this list would work for everybody.
I think the thing about the list for me is it's a long one, right? If I was every day thinking about all 7 of those things, I think I'd have a tough time managing it. But throughout the year, all of those take spot number 1 at certain times, depending on what I'm at and what I'm doing. I haven't articulated it that way, but I wouldn't take anything off the list, and I'd have to put some thought into adding it. Nothing off the cuff. I mean, because I think marriage for me is obviously a big one, but that could be pursuing those other things are going to be good balance for that. But, honor God and your marriage is pretty much number 2 or should be almost at the forefront of kids. So there's some there, but
I would agree with that. For me, it would just be what are my definitions for each of those? I think they are all encompassing, really. So I wouldn't think that there would be any others that I would add. It would just be how I would define those.
So we go back for a second. We started this talking about the fact that 80% of people have failed on their goals, that we've gone down all kinds of different avenues here. What tips and tricks do you guys have for sustainability of however you're spending your time to continue to spend it productively and be in a headspace where you're willing to and excited to continue to invest in that activity that you've deemed to be so important?
Analyze your personality and your strengths and proceed down the paths that make the most sense to you. We talked about wanting, and I always will talk in a fitness sense, but we talked about getting bored with things. So I know that I get bored. Let's try some different things. Let's experience diversity in running. Let's explore what it has to offer. Certain people that won't work for, right? Certain people are very, I know a guy who for the longest time just ran a half-mile loop around his neighborhood for like a decade, and that was his thing, and that's fine. But find what works for your personality and execute against that. Realize that I think, and I've always kind of bought into this. This was a concept we talked about years ago, but I think I feel like there probably is some sort of limited willpower on a daily basis. So make sure you understand that, I found myself in situations where it's like, okay, I'm going to go do this monster workout and then I'm just worthless the rest of the day. If I right size it, then I'm in a great space. I'm stoked. I accomplished something. Like I'm a happy, positive person. But there's some days like, I'm going to go run for 3 hours and I come home and I just want to lay on the couch all day and I'm not engaging with the kids and I'm not in a great mood because I'm exhausted and I'm whiny and whatever. So figure out what's sustainable for you and do that, and don't be afraid to do the things like run on the treadmill because someone told you it wasn't tough.
Assuming you understand your deepest level and why, I mean, environment and accountability is it for me. And when I say accountability, I mean to others. And that probably, again, comes from a lack of wanting to lose face to anybody or let anyone else down. But those are 2 things that have driven me. I mean, I'm over 2 years on a run streak because there was accountability. And now it's like, I don't even think about it. It's just part of my day. Like I run every day. I just it's not a chore. I don't even care. I mean, sometimes it's just 10 minutes, but I run every day and my wife knows I run every day and it's no big deal now. So accountability in building good habits. One of my favorite quotes is doing ordinary things over a long period of time creates extraordinary results. And that is so true in so many ways, in so many aspects. If you're just consistent, finding the things that are going to make you be consistent. For me, that's environment and accountability.
Yeah, I think you mentioned why, knowing your why. A lot of people don't, and they just kind of jump into something and they don't realize, they don't distinguish between this would be cool if I could versus I really, really want to do this. We've talked about weight loss and the fact that if you've only got 3 discretionary hours, meaning free hours in a day that you're not already doing kid stuff or work stuff or whatever, and you've got to spend half of that, an hour and a half of that 3 hours every single day, half of your free time is going to be completely dedicated to eating right and or working out, and maybe more than that, could be all of the 3 hours. I think you better have a really strong why and know exactly why you want to do it. The other thing, and you touched on this really early on, that I would add is just start small. Start small. Atomic Habits, you hit on that wonderful book, and the idea is remove the barriers, remove the psychological barriers. Just put the stuff up, just put the stuff on, and our eyes just get bigger than our stomach. It's nothing more than going to the grocery when you're hungry and buying all this stuff. And, it's 1-1 and everyone's telling you, like, do all the things. You're like, yeah, I'm going to run a marathon this year, and you haven't even run a 10K. Like, just don't, like, be smarter than that. Maybe if you have a really strong why, maybe you can pull off that leap, but it better be really, really strong. Otherwise, just get your stuff on, go to the gym, walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes and go home. Do that for a week. Then walk on the treadmill for 10 minutes. Just start small, because we've talked about this. You're not only overcoming and trying to overcome physical challenges in many of these goals, but also psychological. And when you're trying to do those all at once, like at a high level of intensity, the willpower, it can dry up quickly.
Yeah. Well, that's a wrap on our first episode, coming back here in season 2. It's good to be back, and looking forward to spending more time with you guys this year. Thanks.